Someone signs a contract to buy a house for $100,000. They never actually buy it. 21 days later, they sell that same contract to a different buyer for $115,000 and walk away with $15,000 in profit without ever owning the property, without a mortgage, without a single repair, without ever holding the title in their name. That's not a scam. That's wholesale real estate. And it's one of the strangest, most misunderstood corners of the entire property investing world. Today, we're breaking down how wholesaling actually works, where the profit really comes from, the real costs nobody mentions, the legal tightrope operators have to walk, and why this business rewards speed and relationships far more than it rewards capital. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why some wholesalers close six figures a year without ever owning a single piece of property. Wholesale real estate isn't actually a real estate business in the traditional sense. It's a contract business that happens to use real estate as its underlying asset. A wholesaler finds a property, typically from a motivated seller who needs to sell fast, and signs a purchase contract giving them the right to buy that property at an agreed price. Instead of actually closing on the purchase, the wholesaler then assigns that same contract to a different buyer, usually an investor looking for a discounted deal for a higher price, pocketing the difference as an assignment fee. The wholesaler never takes ownership, never secures a mortgage, and never touches the property physically beyond an initial walkthrough. The entire business model runs on controlling the right to buy something valuable at a discount and selling that right, not the property itself, to someone willing to pay more for the same opportunity. Everything in wholesaling starts with finding a seller who needs to move fast, and that urgency is the entire source of the discount that makes the whole business work. Motivated sellers come from predictable situations: inherited properties nobody wants to manage, pending foreclosures, divorce settlements requiring a quick split, out-of-state landlords tired of dealing with a distant rental, or homes needing repairs too extensive for a typical retail buyer to consider. Wholesalers build lead generation systems specifically designed to find these sellers before traditional agents or other investors do. Direct mail campaigns, cold calling lists of absentee owners, driving through neighborhoods looking for visibly distressed properties, and increasingly, digital advertising targeting people searching for phrases like "sell my house fast." The wholesaler isn't looking for a nice house at a fair price. They're specifically hunting for a seller whose circumstances matter more to them than getting full market value, since that gap between motivated urgency and market price is where the entire profit opportunity lives. Once a motivated seller agrees to a price, the wholesaler signs a purchase and sale agreement, but with language specifically written to allow assignment to another buyer. This contract typically includes a relatively short closing timeline, often 2 to 4 weeks, and usually requires only a small earnest money deposit to secure it, sometimes just a few $100s, which is one of the reasons wholesaling gets marketed as a low capital way to enter real estate investing. The price locked into this contract needs to sit meaningfully below what an investor buyer would consider fair market value after accounting for repairs, since that gap is the entire pool of profit the wholesaler and the eventual buyer will split between them. A wholesaler who negotiates poorly and locks in a price too close to market value leaves no real room for an assignment fee, since no investor buyer will pay full price for a contract that offers no actual discount to work with. The assignment fee is the wholesaler's entire paycheck, and understanding exactly where it comes from explains the whole business. Once the contract is signed, the wholesaler markets that contract, not the property itself, to their network of investor buyers, presenting the numbers, purchase price, estimated repair costs, and after-repair value, so a buyer can quickly calculate their own potential profit margin. If an investor buyer agrees the deal still leaves them enough margin after paying the wholesaler's fee, they sign an assignment agreement, pay the fee either directly to the wholesaler or through the closing itself, and step into the wholesaler's position as the new buyer under the original contract. Assignment fees typically range from a few $1,000s on smaller, thinner deals to tens of thousands of dollars on properties with significant built-in discounts. And the fee size ultimately depends entirely on how large a gap the wholesaler was able to negotiate between contract price and true market value. A wholesaler working several deals a month, even at a modest average fee, can generate income that rivals or exceeds what a traditional agent earns on a full commission, without ever needing to list a property, hold an open house, or wait months for a buyer to secure financing. Here's what separates a struggling wholesaler from a consistently profitable one, and it's rarely the deals themselves. It's the buyer's list. A curated list of active, reliable cash buyers, investors who've proven they close quickly and pay what they say they'll pay, is the actual engine that turns a signed contract into real money. Wholesalers build this list methodically, attending local real estate investment meetups, running targeted advertising toward investors, and tracking every past buyer's preferences, price range, property type, target neighborhoods, so a new deal can be matched to the right buyer within hours rather than weeks. A wholesaler with a strong buyer's list can move a contract almost immediately after signing it, while one without that relationship network might struggle to assign a genuinely good deal before the closing deadline arrives, forcing a price cut or a lost deal entirely. In a very real sense, the buyer's list, not any individual property, is the asset a wholesaling business is actually built around. Wholesaling gets marketed as nearly free to start, but consistent deal flow requires real, ongoing marketing spend that beginners often underestimate badly. Direct mail campaigns targeting distressed property lists cost real money per piece sent, and response rates are typically low enough that a wholesaler needs to mail hundreds or thousands of pieces to generate a handful of serious leads. Pay-per-click advertising and cold calling services add their own steady monthly costs, and skip tracing tools used to find current contact information for absentee property owners carry per lookup fees that add up quickly at any real volume. Successful wholesalers track cost per lead and cost per signed contract with the same discipline any serious marketer applies. Since a business that can't reliably calculate what it costs to generate one closable deal has no real way to know whether its marketing spend is actually profitable or quietly draining cash every single month. Many new wholesalers underestimate this cost entirely, expecting a handful of mailers or calls to produce a steady stream of deals, only to discover that consistent deal flow actually requires a marketing budget closer to what a small local business would spend on customer acquisition. Wholesaling occupies a legally gray area in a growing number of states, and understanding that risk is essential for anyone taking this business seriously. Some states have passed laws specifically requiring wholesalers to hold a real estate license once they market properties they don't own, treating repeated contract assignment activity as functionally equivalent to brokering a real estate transaction without proper licensure. Contracts also need to be written carefully, since a seller who later feels misled about the wholesaler's role, believing they were dealing with an actual end buyer rather than a middleman planning to resell the contract, can create real legal exposure and reputational damage. Reputable wholesalers disclose their intent clearly, use properly drafted assignable contracts reviewed by real estate attorneys, and stay closely informed on state-specific regulations, since the legal landscape around this business has shifted meaningfully in recent years, and continues evolving as more states scrutinize the practice. When assignment isn't practical, either due to state law restrictions or a seller who explicitly doesn't want their contract assigned to an unknown party, wholesalers often use a double closing instead. In this structure, the wholesaler actually closes on the property first, briefly taking title, then immediately resells to the end buyer in a second, nearly simultaneous closing, sometimes using short-term transactional funding to cover the brief period between the two transactions. This approach keeps the original seller's sale price confidential from the end buyer and avoids any assignment clause restrictions in the original contract. But it introduces real additional costs, 2 sets of closing costs instead of 1, plus the expense of the transactional funding itself. Sophisticated wholesalers know exactly when to structure a deal as a standard assignment versus a double closing, since choosing the wrong structure for a given deal can quietly erase a meaningful chunk of the profit margin the deal was supposed to generate in the first place. In wholesaling, speed isn't just helpful, it's the entire competitive edge that separates profitable operators from everyone else chasing the same motivated sellers. A distressed seller who needs cash quickly will typically go with whoever can close fastest and with the least hassle, which means a wholesaler's ability to evaluate a property, run comparable sales, estimate repair costs, and present a firm offer within hours rather than days directly determines how many deals they actually win against competing investors and other wholesalers working the exact same lead lists. This urgency cuts both directions, since the wholesaler then has to move just as fast finding and closing an end buyer before their own contract deadline expires. The entire business essentially runs as a short, high-pressure sprint repeated over and over. Find the seller fast, lock the contract fast, find the buyer fast, close fast, with very little room for the slower, more deliberate pace that characterizes most other forms of real estate investing. A single wholesaler working alone can typically close a handful of deals a month, limited by how much lead generation, negotiation, and buyer coordination one person can physically manage simultaneously. Scaling beyond that ceiling usually means building a small team. Acquisition specialists who handle seller calls and negotiate contracts, a dispositions manager whose entire job is matching signed contracts to the right buyer as fast as possible, and virtual assistants handling lead qualification and administrative work. Some of the largest wholesaling operations run entirely virtually, sourcing deals in markets across the country from a single centralized office, using local boots-on-the-ground contractors for property walkthroughs, dramatically expanding the pool of available motivated sellers beyond whatever exists in the operator's own backyard. This scaling path mirrors any lead generation-driven sales business, adding headcount specifically at the bottleneck stage, whether that's finding sellers or finding buyers, rather than growing headcount uniformly across the entire operation. Let's actually run the numbers on a typical wholesaling operation. Revenue comes entirely from assignment fees collected across every deal that successfully closes in a given month. Expenses include marketing spend to generate seller leads, skip tracing and data costs, any virtual assistant or acquisition staff salaries, and occasional transactional funding costs on deals structured as double closings. Because a wholesaler never actually purchases the underlying property in a standard assignment deal, the capital requirements stay remarkably low compared to fix and flip investing. But the flip side is that revenue depends entirely on a steady, reliable pipeline of new deals every single month, since there's no ongoing rental income or appreciating assets sitting on the books between closings. A wholesaler who closes even a modest handful of deals a month at healthy assignment fees can generate a meaningful income with a fraction of the capital a traditional real estate investor would need to hold and rehab the same number of properties. Wholesaling has one of the highest dropout rates of any real estate investing strategy, and understanding why explains a lot about the business's actual difficulty level. Deal flow is inconsistent by nature, and a wholesaler can go weeks without a signed contract, followed by a sudden cluster of deals all competing for the same limited pool of buyers at once. A signed contract that fails to find a buyer before the closing deadline can result in a lost earnest money deposit and a damaged relationship with the seller, sometimes even legal exposure if the contract wasn't structured carefully. The skill ceiling is also higher than the marketing around this business suggests. Negotiating with genuinely distressed sellers requires real emotional intelligence, and accurately estimating repair costs and after-repair value takes real experience that beginners frequently get wrong in the early months, either overpaying for contracts nobody wants or underpricing deals that leave real money on the table. Add the emotional toll of constant rejection, Most seller calls and most marketing pieces never convert into anything. And it becomes clear why so many people try wholesaling for a few months, fail to close a single deal, and quietly walk away, convinced the business itself doesn't actually work. So, is wholesale real estate actually a smart way to build income? For the right operator, genuinely, yes. And the appeal is easy to understand once the mechanics are clear. It requires far less capital than buying and rehabbing property directly. The deal cycle is fast compared to almost any other real estate strategy. And a strong buyer's list becomes a durable, reusable asset that makes every subsequent deal easier to close than the one before it. But this is not a passive or effortless business. It rewards constant marketing spend, sharp negotiation skill, and relentless follow-up, more than it rewards patience or capital. The wholesalers who build lasting income in this space are rarely the ones chasing a single big score. They're the ones who treat lead generation and their buyer's list as seriously as any other real business treats its sales pipeline and customer relationships. Approached that way, wholesaling stops looking like a get-rich-quick gimmick and starts looking like exactly what it is: a lean, fast-moving sales business that happens to use real estate contracts as its product. That's the real economics of wholesale real estate: a contract-based business built on speed, motivated sellers, and a buyer's list that compounds in value with every closed deal. If videos like this help you see industries differently, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. See you in the next one.